Alright, so this Friday, the next structure deck, Master of Pendulum, is coming out, and this structure deck is actually really good. It's the best structure deck in a long time. It includes the Magician Pendulum cards, which are better than the pendulums we have currently, but not better than the pendulums that are coming out in Breaker of Shadows. So, for a couple months, because that's not Breaker Shadows isn't coming out till like the end of January. So basically, for 2 months, this is going to be like very relevant stuff. So I'm going to be covering the 10 new cards that are coming out here. There's a lot of new stuff. So the first one, this is probably the most notable, is the Dragonpit Magician. So this is finally a good 8 scale. So you can finally pendulum summon level 7s easily using this. It's a vanilla level 7, so it's somewhat useful as a monster to just pendulum summon it because you can make rank 7s and it also has 2700 defense. But you're not going to be doing much else with it. Its pendulum effect is actually somewhat useful. So once per turn, if you have a magician card in your other pendulum zone, you can discard one pendulum monster, then just target one spell or trap card on the field and destroy it. I've played with this deck a little bit, and that's actually surprisingly useful. It's pretty easy to get a magician in your other zone, and you end up with lots of free pendulum monsters, and so you can just discard the ones you don't need, and you have a MST right here. So MST is definitely good. So this is a great card to use. Its counterpart is not quite as good, Dragonpulse Magician. So this is a vanilla 1 scale. It's a level 4, so you can normal summon it. It's 1800 attack, so it's useful in that sense. But its effect is not very useful. It's exactly the same as Dragonpit's effect, except for you target a monster on the field and destroy it instead of a spell or trap. And frankly, that's just not that good. Destroying spell and traps is still good. MST is still a good card, but you're not going to be playing like a Smashing Ground or Soul Taker, and that's basically what this effect boils down to. It's not totally useless, so it's a decent scale as an option, but in my opinion, the low scale is much better to be used as Oafdragon Magician. So this is a 2 scale instead of a 1 scale, but that honestly doesn't matter at all because you're not playing any level 2 monsters. So it's in effect the same exact scale, and this one has a much better effect. So this one is a level 6 monster, and that actually is very relevant because you can make Naruto with this because it's level 6 spellcaster. It's got 2100 attack, which is pretty good. And then its pendulum effect is if you have a magician card in your other pendulum zone, once again that's pretty easy to do, you can add one face-up magician or odd-eyes pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, except Oafdragon Magician. You only use this once per turn. So that's actually mainly useful because you can restock your hand to activate Dragonpit Magician's effect, which is, as we've already established, good. So this plus this make a really good combo because you just get the pendulums back in your hand and then pitch them with this to MST stuff. So it's pretty nice to have. And then its monster effect, I would argue, is even better. So if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one Magician Pendulum monster or one Odd-Eyes monster in your graveyard, except Oafdragon Magician, and add it to your hand. You can only use it once per turn. So this is basically a way of getting back the cards you're pitching to the grave with Dragonpit Magician. So as soon as you Pendulum summon this, then you can get more cards available to discard with this, and you're not having to pull at your extra deck resources in this case. You're reusing cards that are otherwise dead in the graveyard. So I think this is the best low scale that you can play in the deck at the moment, at least. And the pendulum effect, to add one back from your extra deck, works best with Wisdom Eye Magician. Wisdom Eye Magician is a little bit awkward, but it is essentially a searcher for the deck. So it's a 5 scale, so you're not really going to be using this as a scale. That's fine because it searches other scales. As a monster, it's level 4 with 1500 attack, so not the best attack, but being a level 4 is useful because you can use this for rank 4s. So the pendulum effect, which is why you're playing this, is if you have a Magician or Performapal card in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy this card, and if you do, place one pendulum monster from your deck in your pendulum zone except Wisdom Eye Magician. So this is really good because if you draw this with either end of the scale, if you draw it with a low scale or with a high scale, you can just use this to search the opposite and complete your scale. And you have one monster already in your extra deck, being this, to potentially pendulum summon this back or add it to your hand with Oafdragon and discard it. So for example, if you open this or either Oafdragon or Dragonpit, you can just search the other one using this. Oafdragon can put this back in your hand, and then you can discard this with Dragonpit Magician to destroy your spell or trap card. So it's a very nice combo. The only reason I don't really like this card is because the Pendulum effect does not work with the reinforcement of the army of the deck, which is a card that I will be getting into once we hit the spells. So it's kind of awkward because it doesn't actually work when you search it. It only works when you draw into it. It's still worth playing though, I think. And then the monster effect is not nearly as good as the Pendulum effect. It is you can discard this card, target one card in your Pendulum zone whose current Pendulum scale is different from its original Pendulum scale, and its Pendulum scale becomes the original until the end of the turn. And this is not very useful. Not the best monster effect. You basically are just using this for the Pendulum effect, or as a body, level 4 monster. And then the last magician that we're getting is easily the worst out of the 5, Nobledragon Magician. So this one's a tuner. So they specifically made it awkward so you couldn't summon this and then just go into easy synchros and just keep doing it every turn. So the pendulum effect is unless you have a magician card in your other pendulum zone, destroy this card. It doesn't really matter because it's a 5 scale. You're not really using this as a pendulum like ever. So it's basically just a monster. It's a level 3 tuner with bad stats. So the monster effect is cannot use as a synchro material except for synchro summon of a dragon type synchro monster. So that somewhat limits it, but there are a lot of good dragons that are level 7, which is the easiest to go into with a 4 plus a 3. And then if this card is used as a synchro material, unless all of the synchro materials are odd-eyes monsters, place this card on the bottom of the deck. So that is kind of forces you to go to level 10s, which because 7 plus 3 is 10. But in that case, there's not really very many good level 10 synchros that happen to be dragons. However, the last part of the effect makes up for that somewhat. So it says if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can target one level 7 or higher odd-eyes monster you control, reduce its level by 3, and if you do, special summon this card. So this is basically the only way that this card works properly is to have this either in your hand or your graveyard. The graveyard is nice because you can pitch it with this. That's probably optimal. So if you have this in your graveyard, you can target your odd-eyes that you have on the field. Obviously, it's going to be the normal odd-eyes Pendulum Dragon. That's the ideal thing. So you reduce that to level 4, special summon this, go into a level 7 Dragon Synchro, which there are a good number of, and then this will go back to your extra deck and you can reuse it. Unfortunately, it's in your extra deck then, so you can't special summon it by reducing the monster. So either you go for a level 10 after you pendulum summon it back the second time, which I think there's only one. I think there might be one that you could potentially go into. Or if you don't use this with an odd-eyes monster to go into level 10, then it goes immediately to the bottom of your deck and you don't have access to pendulum summoning this anymore. So you can reuse it once if it's if you have an odd-eyes monster to go with it. So you can basically make 2 level 7 synchros using this plus an odd-eyes and some other level 4 monster. I don't really like this because it's kind of awkward, but it has some uses, and obviously being a pendulum tuner is useful. So the last main deck monster that we're getting is Pendulum Stratos is what I call it. So Performapal Skullcrobat Joker is level 4. It has 1800 attack, so those are Stratos stats. It's a level 8 Pendulum scale, but that's not really relevant because its downside is way too harsh for you to actually use this as a scale. So the Pendulum effect is you cannot Pendulum summon monsters except Performapal, Magician, Pendulum, and Odd-Eyes monsters. So, and this effect cannot be negated. So you don't really want to use this as a scale because it limits you way too much. You can't Pendulum summon for off-theme stuff. In a pinch you can though. In a pinch it is a 8 scale that can Pendulum summon these 3 specific things. So it is somewhat useful there, but you're mainly playing this because of the monster effect. When this card is normal summoned, you can add one Performapal monster, Magician, Pendulum monster, or Odd Eyes monster from your deck to your hand, except itself. So you're going to be playing this in any Performapal deck, any Magician deck, and I mean Odd Eyes decks, but that's not really a thing. You can obviously tech Odd Eyes into other decks, so it's an option to search those. But the main things this searches are Performapals and Magicians, which are two of the best Pendulum decks. So this is Pendulum Stratos, and it's really good. So then onto the spells. The first one is Pendulum Rhoda. This is basically Super Rhoda, actually, for Pendulums. Ironic that they limited Rhoda right before releasing this, which is way better. So this, you discard one card, add two Magician Pendulum monsters with different names from your deck to your hand. So right there, that's a full scale. Also, until the end of your opponent's next turn, after this card resolves, Magician cards in your Pendulum zones cannot be destroyed by card effects. I'd actually argue that's a downside more than it helps you, because it makes it so you can't destroy Wisdom Eye Magician with its own effect, because for this to work, you have to destroy this card. So you can't search for Wisdom Eye and use its effect. So you basically have to search your high and low scale off of this. But it does have some upside. Your opponent can't use stuff like Wavering Eyes on you. You also can't use Wavering Eyes on yourself, though. So, I mean, you have to consider that to be helpful and not helpful at the same time. And then you can only activate one of these per turn. That's not super relevant. And then you cannot activate this card if you activate a Magician monster's Pendulum effect this turn. That's also not really relevant because you activate search cards at the beginning of your turn before you do anything else. There's not really any reason to do this second. So those two downsides are not super relevant. I'd argue that you can't destroy your own cards is actually a downside. But still, discard one to search two and get a complete scale is a really strong card. And this is one of the best things that Magician Pendulums have going for them. And then the next spell is Sky Iris. So this one is a field spell, and Magician, Performapal, and Odd Eyes cards in your Pendulums cannot be targeted by opponent's card effects. So this makes them resistant to a lot of destruction, but not quite everything, because stuff like Wavering Eyes can still get rid of them. And then the main effect, you can target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, add one Odd Eyes card from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect of Sky Iris once per turn. So, this is obviously only going to be used in variants that play Odd Eyes cards. And the main reason I think this is good is because it can search for the Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon to get the monster, or it can search for the Odd Eyes Fusion to get the spell if you already have the Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. So it is definitely flexible, and destroying face-up cards that you control is not really a downside, because Pendulums, you want to be destroying themselves a lot anyways. So I think this is pretty good, just because it has the ability to search both ends of the combo. It can't just search the monster or the spell, it can search both, so whatever you're missing, this will get you. And Odd Eyes Fusion into Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon is obviously a good play. The last two new cards in here are extra deck monsters. So the first one is a Synchro. It's a level 7 Synchro, so this is specifically made to work with this tuner. And so it also is generic, though, so keep that in mind. The effect of this is when this card is special summoned, you can target one card in your Pendulum Zone, special summon it. Also, this card cannot attack for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect once per turn, and then monsters in your opponent's possession cannot activate their effects during the battle phase. So this is kind of an awkward card to actually make use of. The first effect is honestly not that useful. Usually your cards in your Pendulum Zone are there to be scales, and if you want to get rid of them, it's a lot easier to just destroy them and then Pendulum summon them. That usually is a better way to do it. Also, this can't even attack when you use that effect. So that effect is awkward to use, really. I think the main reason it's there is if you have an Odd Eyes card in your Pendulum scale, you can summon it and then go into the exit. I think that's the main reason they worked that in. And then the other effect, your opponent's monsters cannot activate their effects during the battle phase, is fairly useful, but it's super situational. It says possession, so that includes hand traps. So if you're going for game and they don't have any traps, you can push through stuff like Damage Juggler. So it's like a better version of Armades, essentially. So I think this is useful as a generic level 7 synchro that is a better Armades. That's basically what this is. So I think this probably will see play. Just because Armades sees play and this is better. And then the next is the Exceed, Odd-Eyes Absolute Dragon. So this is a rank 7, also generic. It has slightly higher stats. And then the effect is when any player's monster declares an attack and you detach one extra material from this card, negate the attack, then you can special summon one Odd-Eyes monster from your hand or graveyard. If this Exceed summon card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Odd-Eyes monster from your extra deck, except Odd-Eyes Absolute Dragon. You can only use this effect of Odd-Eyes Absolute Dragon once per turn. So in a deck that's playing all the Odd-Eyes stuff, this is actually a really good card. So the first effect at first seems somewhat lackluster because it's like, oh, it's just Utopia. But it's Utopia plus you get to special summon monsters. And whatever you're detaching is likely going to be an Odd-Eyes monster. So you can just detach the material and then special summon it because it was properly summoned beforehand if it's the synchro. And then better than that effect is the floating effect, I think. So the floating effect is really good because whenever this is sent to the graveyard, you just special summon Odd-Eyes Vortex Dragon, which is a really strong monster. It's basically like a pseudo Cyber Dragon Infinity. So your opponent has to try to get rid of this without sending it to the graveyard, which is obviously awkward, but doable. So, I mean, it's not amazing, but it's a decent boss monster to go into. And that's it for the new cards. The only other thing I want to mention is this set does have Summoner's Art in it, which is still expensive, so this will be the easiest way to get Summoner's Art. So that's really the most notable reprint in there. Overall, it's a very good set, and I'm planning on buying at least individuals to get all the Magician stuff. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to check out some other stuff.